The ground shook under Jake Morrison's boots as another explosion rocked the battlefield. Smoke filled the air and made everything look gray and dirty. He pressed his back against the broken wall of what used to be a house and checked his rifle. Only half a magazine left. The Scarn had been hitting their position for 3 hours now and showed no signs of stopping. "Jake, we need to move," called his partner Vexhai from across the rubble. The tall alien looked like what humans might call an elf from old stories. His silver hair was dirty with dust, and his violet eyes were bright with worry. "The civilians are trapped in the shelter 2 blocks down. If we don't get them out soon, the Scarn will find them." Jake nodded and reloaded his weapon. He had been fighting alongside Vexhai for 8 months now. The Etherian was one of the best soldiers he had ever known. More than that, he was a good friend. It was strange how war could bring people together, even when they came from different worlds. The two of them moved through the broken streets like shadows. Jake watched the rooftops while Vexhai checked the windows. They had done this dance many times before. The human and the alien worked together like they had been partners their whole lives. Trust was everything in war, and Jake trusted Vexhai with his life. They reached the shelter without seeing any Scarn. The building was half destroyed, but the basement was still solid. Jake could hear voices down below, scared voices, women and children mostly. The Scarn loved to target civilians. It was their way of breaking the spirit of their enemies. "How many?" Jake whispered. Vexhai listened carefully. His hearing was much better than any human. "Maybe 20. Mostly families from the outer district." His face was grim. "Jake, there are Scarn ships coming. I can hear the engines." Jake cursed under his breath. They needed more time. "Can we get them out the back?" "Not all of them. The old ones and the little children cannot move fast enough." Vexhai looked at his friend. "Someone needs to stay and hold them off." They both knew what that meant. Whoever stayed would probably not make it out alive. The Scarn did not take prisoners. They killed everything that moved. Jake started to speak, but Vexhai shook his head. "My friend, you know it has to be me. You are faster. You can get them to safety better than I can." "Like hell," Jake said. "We stick together." That was the deal. Vexhai smiled sadly. Some deals must be broken for the greater good. He grabbed Jake's arm. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to promise me something. Something very important." The sound of Scarn aircraft grew louder. They were running out of time. "I have 3 sisters back home," Vexhai said quickly. "Lyra, Nova, and Zara. They are all I have left in this world. My parents died when I was young. If something happens to me, they will be alone. They will have no protection." Jake could see where this was going. "Vex, you're going to make it out. We both are. Promise me you will protect them." Vexhai insisted. "Promise me you will keep them safe. Say the words I teach you. Say them exactly as I tell you." The alien spoke a series of words in his own language. The sounds were strange and musical. Jake tried to repeat them but got them wrong. Vexhai made him say it again and again until he got it right. The words felt heavy on his tongue, like they carried more weight than Jake understood. "Good," Vexhai said. "You have given your word. A human's word is worth more than gold to my people. They will know you can be trusted." Before Jake could ask what that meant, the first Scarn transport landed in the street. Black shapes poured out of it like angry insects. They moved fast and carried weapons that could cut through steel. "Go," Vexhai said. "Get them out. I will buy you time." Jake wanted to argue, but there was no time. He ran to the shelter entrance and called down to the people below. "Everyone out! Now! Move fast but stay quiet!" The families came up quickly. They were scared, but they trusted the human soldier. Jake had earned a good name among the Etherian people. Humans were known for keeping their promises and protecting the innocent. It was one of the reasons the Etherian Empire had asked for their help in this war. Jake led the group through back alleys and broken buildings. Behind them, he could hear the sound of weapons fire. Vexhai was keeping his word and holding the line. The alien was buying them precious time with his life. They reached the evacuation point just as human transport ships arrived. Jake helped load the civilians and counted heads. Everyone was safe. 23 people who would live to see another day because 2 soldiers had done their job. But the victory felt empty. Jake looked back toward the shelter and saw smoke rising into the sky. The weapons fire had stopped. That was not a good sign. Against orders, Jake ran back through the streets. He found HFY lying in the ruins of the shelter. The alien was badly hurt and losing blood fast. The scarred bodies around him told the story of his last stand. He had fought like a hero and saved them all. Jake knelt beside his friend and tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The wounds were too deep. "Did they make it?" HFY whispered. "All of them," Jake said. "Every single one." HFY smiled. "Good. You are a man of honor, Jake Morrison. My sisters will be proud to call you family." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, but HFY's eyes were already closing. "Remember your promise," the alien whispered. "The words you spoke bind you to them now. Take care of Lyra, Nova, and Zara. They are good girls. They will make you happy." Those were his last words. HFY Silverleaf died in Jake's arms as the sun set over the battlefield. Jake held his friend's body and felt something break inside his chest. War always took the good ones first. He carried HFY back to the human base and requested permission to return the body to his family. It was the least he could do. A hero deserved to be buried with honor among his own people. 3 days later, Jake stood at HFY's funeral on the Etherian homeworld. The ceremony was beautiful and sad. 3 young women in white robes stood at the front of the gathering. They had silver hair like HFY and the same violet eyes. These had to be the sisters he had promised to protect. After the service, they approached Jake. The eldest one spoke first. "You are Jake Morrison," she said. It was not a question. "My brother spoke of you in his letters. He said you were the finest human he had ever known." "Your brother was a hero," Jake replied. "He saved 23 people with his sacrifice. I wish I could have saved him too." The 3 sisters looked at each other with expressions Jake could not read. Finally, the eldest spoke again. "We know about your promise to our brother. We know the words you spoke. When you are ready, we will be waiting for you to honor them." Jake did not understand what she meant, but he nodded anyway. A promise was a promise. Whatever HFY had asked of him, he would do his best to keep his word. He just had no idea what he had actually agreed to do. 3 months after HFY's funeral, Jake found himself on a transport ship heading back to the Etherian homeworld. Command had reassigned him as a military liaison, which meant he would be working with Etherian forces instead of fighting on the front lines. Part of him was grateful for the break from combat. Another part missed the simple clarity of battle. The real reason he had asked for this assignment was to check on HFY's sisters. A promise was a promise, and Jake took his word seriously. He had been raised to believe that a man's honor was measured by how well he kept his commitments. His father had taught him that before the old man died in a mining accident back on Earth. The Silverleaf family estate was located outside the capital city in the hills. Jake rented a small transport and drove through winding roads lined with trees that looked almost like earth oak, but had silver leaves that chimed softly in the wind. Everything on this world was beautiful, in a way that made humans feel like clumsy visitors. When he reached the estate, Jake was surprised by its size. The house was built from white stone and had tall windows that caught the light. Gardens surrounded it on all sides, full of flowers that glowed softly even in daylight. This was clearly the home of a wealthy and important family. Jake parked his transport and walked to the front door. Before he could knock, it opened. A young Etherian woman stood there dressed in a simple white robe. She had silver hair that fell to her shoulders and violet eyes that seemed to look right through him. This had to be one of the sisters. "Jake Morrison," she said quietly. "We have been waiting for you." "I'm sorry it took so long," Jake replied. "Military duties kept me busy. I wanted to check on you and your sisters. Make sure you were doing well." The woman stepped aside to let him enter. "I am Zara, the youngest. My sisters are in the main hall. They will want to see you immediately." Jake followed her through corridors lined with paintings and sculptures. The art was old and valuable looking. Everything in the house spoke of history and tradition. It made Jake feel even more out of place in his simple military uniform. The main hall was a large room with a high ceiling and windows that looked out over the gardens. 2 other women waited there, both dressed in the same white robes as Zara. They stood when Jake entered, and he could see the family resemblance immediately. All 3 had the same silver hair and violet eyes as their dead brother. "I am Lyra," said the tallest one. She looked to be the eldest, and carried herself like a soldier. "And this is Nova." She gestured to the 3rd sister, who smiled warmly at Jake. "It's good to meet you all," Jake said. "Vexhai talked about you often. He loved you very much." "As we loved him," Lyra replied. "He was a good brother and a brave warrior. We are proud that he died with honor." Jake nodded. "He saved many lives. The families he protected will remember his sacrifice. And we will remember yours," Nova said softly. "You carried our brother home when you could have left him on the battlefield. That means more to us than you know." The 3 sisters exchanged glances that Jake did not understand. There was something going on here that he was missing. The way they looked at him was strange, respectful, but also expectant, like they were waiting for him to do something specific. "I made a promise to your brother," Jake said. "He asked me to protect you. I want you to know that I take that seriously. If there's anything you need, anything I can do to help, just ask." Lyra stepped forward. "We know about your promise. We know the words you spoke to our brother as he lay dying." "I'm not sure I understand," Jake said. "Vexhai taught me some words in your language. I said them because he asked me to, but I don't know what they meant." The 3 sisters looked at each other again. This time, Jake saw something like pity in their eyes. "Perhaps we should explain," said an older voice from the doorway. Jake turned to see an elderly Etherian man entering the hall. He was dressed in formal robes and carried himself with the dignity of someone used to respect. "I am Elder Thane Korath, advisor to this family. I served their father and grandfather before him." The old man studied Jake with sharp eyes. "Tell me, young human, do you know what the vow of eternal guardianship means?" "No, sir," Jake admitted. "I've never heard those words before." "It is an ancient law among our people," Korath explained. "When a dying man passes the protection of his female relatives to another, and that other accepts using the proper words, a sacred bond is formed. The protector becomes responsible for their safety, their honor, and their well-being in all things." Jake was beginning to get a bad feeling about this. "What kind of responsibility?" "Marriage," Lyra said simply. "The words you spoke to our brother made you our husband under Etherian law." Jake felt like someone had hit him in the chest with a hammer. "What? That's impossible. I was just making a promise to help protect you. I didn't agree to marry anyone." "The law does not care what you intended," Korath said. "It only cares what words were spoken and who witnessed them. Your vow was heard by a dying member of the Silverleaf bloodline. That makes it binding and sacred." "This is crazy," Jake said, running his hands through his hair. "There has to be some mistake, some way to undo this." "There is not," Nova said, gently. "The vow cannot be broken once made. To try would bring dishonor to our brother's memory and shame to our family name." Jake looked at the 3 women standing before him. They were beautiful and seemed kind, but this was not what he had signed up for. He was a soldier, not a husband. He barely knew these people. "What if I refuse?" he asked. "What if I just leave and pretend this never happened?" "Then we would be left without protection," Zara said quietly. "Other men would come seeking to claim us and our family's wealth. Some of them would not be as honorable as you." "Our father left us a great fortune," Lyra explained. "Land, businesses, investments on many worlds. But Etherian law says unmarried women cannot control such assets alone. We need a male guardian or husband to manage our affairs. And if you abandon us," Nova added, "the law would give our inheritance to the next male relative. Our cousin Kyldor has already expressed interest in our situation." Jake could see the trap he had walked into. His promise to protect these women had somehow become a legal obligation to marry them. All 3 of them. The idea was overwhelming. "I need time to think about this," he said. "Of course," Korath said. "But understand that the longer you delay, the more difficult our position becomes. News of your vow is already spreading. Soon, other interested parties will begin making their own claims." Jake looked at each sister in turn. Lyra stood straight and proud, clearly prepared to accept whatever fate brought. Nova watched him with hope in her eyes, as if she believed something good could come from this mess. Zara remained quiet and thoughtful, studying him like he was a puzzle to be solved. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "How do you feel about this? Do you want to be married to some human you barely know?" "Want is not the question," Lyra replied. "Duty is what matters. Our brother chose you. He believed you were worthy of our trust." "But to answer your question," Nova said with a small smile, "we have heard much about humans. Your people are known for their loyalty and protective nature. There are worse fates than being bound to an honorable man." "And you seem kind," Zara added quietly. "Kinder than our cousin would be." Jake realized he was facing an impossible choice. He could walk away and leave these women to face whatever came next, or he could accept a responsibility he never wanted and try to make the best of it. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "what would you expect from me? What does being your husband mean?" "Protection first," Lyra said. "Respect for our family name and traditions. Beyond that, we would hope for friendship and understanding." "We are not asking for love," Nova added. "That must come naturally if it comes at all. We only ask that you treat us with kindness and honor." Jake stood in the beautiful hall surrounded by 3 women who were now apparently his wives and tried to figure out how his life had gone so completely off track. All he had wanted was to keep a promise to a dead friend. "All right," he said finally. "I'll stay. I'll try to make this work. But we're going to have to figure out how to do this together, because I have no idea what I'm doing." The relief on their faces was obvious. Whatever happened next, at least they would face it together. Jake moved into the Silverleaf estate 3 days later with nothing but a duffel bag and a head full of confusion. The sisters had prepared a large room for him in the east wing of the house, far enough from their quarters to give everyone space to adjust. The room was bigger than most apartments Jake had lived in, with its own bathroom and a balcony that looked out over the gardens. The first week was awkward for everyone. Jake felt like an intruder in their home, despite their efforts to make him welcome. The sisters went about their daily routines, while he tried to figure out what his role was supposed to be. Elder Korath had given him books about Etherian marriage customs, but reading about theory was different from living the reality. "Don't have to eat alone," Nova said one morning, finding Jake in the kitchen making coffee. "We have a proper dining room." "I didn't want to intrude," Jake replied. "This is your home. I'm still figuring out where I fit." Nova smiled and poured herself a cup of tea from an elegant pot. "It's our home now. All of ours. That's what marriage means. Even this kind of marriage." She was right, of course. Jake was going to have to start thinking differently about his situation. These women were his wives now, whatever that meant. He needed to act like a partner, not a guest. From that day forward, Jake joined the sisters for meals. It was strange at first, sitting at the long table in the formal dining room while they talked about estate business and family matters. But gradually, he began to understand how their household worked. Lyra managed the family's military contracts and security concerns. She was sharp and decisive, with a mind for strategy that reminded Jake of the best officers he had served under. Nova handled their charitable foundations and medical research investments. She had trained as a healer before the war started and still helped at local clinics. Zara was responsible for their technology holdings and research projects. She spent most of her time in a workshop filled with gadgets Jake could barely understand. "Your people have fascinating approaches to engineering," Zara told him one afternoon, when he found her working on some kind of energy device. "Human solutions are often less elegant than ours, but they work in situations where our methods fail." "We call it making do with what you have," Jake said. "Humans got good at fixing things with spare parts and hope." Zara laughed, a sound like silver bells. "I like that. Spare parts and hope. It's very honest." Jake found himself enjoying these conversations. Each sister was intelligent and interesting in her own way. Lyra challenged him with tactical discussions and wanted to know about human military doctrine. Nova asked about Earth medicine and was fascinated by combat medic techniques. Zara picked his brain about human technology and shared Etherian innovations that amazed him, but not everyone was happy about their unusual arrangement. News of Jake's marriage had spread through Etherian society and caused quite a stir. Some people thought it was romantic. Others saw it as scandalous. A few considered it an insult to tradition. Lord Kaeldor has been asking questions, Lyra told Jake one evening as they walked through the gardens. He's been trying to find legal grounds to challenge your claim to our family. What kind of questions? Jake asked. Whether the vow was properly witnessed. Whether you understood what you were agreeing to. Whether a human can legally hold Etherian marriage bonds. Lyra's expression was grim. He has allies in the government who don't like the idea of humans gaining influence in our society. Jake had met Kaeldor briefly at a social function the week before. The man was tall and handsome with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He had looked at Jake like he was something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. Can he actually do anything? Jake asked. Possibly. If he can prove the marriage is invalid, he could claim guardianship over us as the next male relative. Then he would control our inheritance and could force us to marry whomever he chose. The thought made Jake angry. These women had already been through enough without some ambitious politician trying to use them for his own gain. What do we need to do to protect ourselves? Show that we are a true family unit, Lyra said. Attend social functions together. Present ourselves as a united household. Make it clear that you take your responsibilities seriously. Jake nodded. Whatever it takes. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of social obligations. Jake found himself dressed in formal clothes and attending parties, dinners, and cultural events. The sisters taught him Etherian etiquette and helped him navigate conversations with politicians and business leaders. It was at one of these events that Jake first realized his feelings were changing. He was watching Nova work the room, speaking with donors for her medical charity. She had a gift for making people feel heard and understood. When an elderly woman began crying while talking about her sick grandson, Nova held her hands and spoke softly until the woman smiled again. She's special, isn't she? Zara said, appearing beside Jake with 2 glasses of wine. They all are, Jake replied, accepting the drink. I'm starting to understand why Vexahai was so proud of you. And we're starting to understand why he chose you, Zara said. You could have walked away from all this. Most men would have, but you stayed and tried to make it work. Jake looked around the elegant ballroom at the gathered crowd of Etherian nobility. I made a promise to your brother. I don't break my word. Is that the only reason you stayed? Zara asked quietly. Jake considered the question. A month ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. But now he wasn't so sure. Somewhere along the way, duty had begun to feel like something else. No, he admitted. It's not the only reason anymore. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood on his balcony looking out at the silver-leaf trees and thinking about how much his life had changed. 3 months ago, he had been a simple soldier, fighting a war. Now, he was married to 3 alien women and learning to navigate politics and society. Having trouble sleeping? Lyra's voice came from the next balcony over. She was standing in the moonlight wearing a simple nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Just thinking, Jake said. This whole situation is still pretty overwhelming. For us, too, Lyra admitted. We've never been married before either. We're all learning as we go. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind chimes in the trees. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Are you happy with how things turned out? Really happy, I mean. Not just making the best of it. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. When our brother died, I thought our family was finished. I thought we would be forced to marry men who saw us only as assets to be acquired. But you, she turned to look at him. You see us as people. You listen when we speak and respect our opinions. You've made an effort to understand our world instead of expecting us to change for you. You're my wives, Jake said. Of course I respect you. Many husbands don't, Lyra replied, especially not arranged marriages. You could have treated us like possessions or servants. Instead, you've treated us like partners. Jake thought about that. Is that what we are? Partners? I think so, Lyra said. It's different from what I expected marriage to be, but it feels right. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Elder Korath found Jake in the garden and delivered the message with a worried expression. Lord Kaeldor has formally challenged your marriage in the High Council, the old man said. He claims the vow was invalid because you didn't understand the consequences of your words. Jake felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means there will be a formal hearing. You'll have to prove that your marriage is legitimate and that you're worthy of the Silverleaf name. Korath's face was grave. If you lose, the marriage will be annulled, and the sisters will be placed under Kaeldor's guardianship. Jake looked across the garden to where Nova was tending to the flowers. She had taught him the names of all the plants and explained how they were used in traditional medicine. The thought of her being forced to marry someone like Kaeldor made him furious. "When is the hearing?" he asked. 2 weeks from today." "Then we'd better start preparing," Jake said, "because there's no way I'm letting that bastard get his hands on my family." The word slipped out before he could stop it, but Jake realized he meant it. Somewhere along the way, these 3 women had become his family. He would fight for them just as fiercely as he had fought alongside their brother. The war was far from over, but now Jake was fighting for something more important than victory. He was fighting for the people he loved. The High Council chamber was an intimidating place, built from black stone with tall pillars that reached toward a domed ceiling. Jake stood at the center of the room wearing his best formal clothes, while dozens of Etherian nobles watched from circular seating that rose around him like an amphitheater. The sisters sat in the front row, their faces calm but their hands clasped tightly together. Lord Kaeldor looked confident as he presented his case to the council. He was a striking figure with dark hair and golden eyes that seemed to burn with ambition. His voice carried clearly through the chamber as he spoke. "Honored counselors, we are here today because an ancient law has been misused by someone who did not understand its meaning. This human soldier may be brave and honorable, but he cannot possibly comprehend the sacred nature of Etherian marriage. Bonds." Kaeldor gestured toward Jake with theatrical disdain. He spoke words he did not understand to a dying man in the chaos of battle. This was not a deliberate vow, but a confused attempt to comfort a friend. To treat such words as binding is to make a mockery of our most sacred traditions. The council members murmured among themselves. Jake could see that some of them were nodding in agreement. Kaeldor was a skilled speaker, and his arguments sounded reasonable to people who had never been in combat. Furthermore, Kaeldor continued, "What kind of husband abandons his wives for months after the marriage ceremony? This human returned to war instead of staying to consummate the union. He has shown no interest in Etherian culture and makes no effort to honor our ways." Jake felt his temper rising, but Elder Korath had warned him to stay silent until called upon. This was Etherian law, not human justice, and the rules were different here. When Kaeldor finished speaking, the council's chief justice called Jake forward. The old woman had silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. She had been presiding over legal matters for longer than Jake had been alive. "Jake Morrison of Earth," she said formally, "you stand accused of entering into a false marriage through ignorance and deception. How do you answer these charges?" Jake straightened his shoulders and looked directly at her. "Your Honor, I entered into this marriage through a sacred promise made to a dying friend. I may not have understood all the legal implications, but I understood the spirit of what I was agreeing to. I promised to protect Lyra, Nova, and Zara Silverleaf, and I have honored that promise every day since." "Yet you left them alone for months," another council member said. "Is this how humans show protection?" "I was serving my military duties," Jake replied. "But the moment I was free to return, I came here to be with my wives. I've lived in their home, learned their customs, and made their safety and happiness my priority." The Chief Justice studied him carefully. "Lord Kaeldor claims you do not understand Etherian ways. What do you say to this?" "I say that understanding comes from living and learning, not just from being born to something," Jake answered. "I may be human, but I've taken the time to study your laws and traditions. I've attended your social functions and tried to be a worthy representative of the Silverleaf family name." "Pretty words," Kaeldor interrupted. "But words are not proof. Anyone can claim to understand our ways." The Chief Justice raised her hand for silence. "Lord Kaeldor raises a valid point. Claims must be supported by evidence." She looked at Jake with those cold eyes. "Are you prepared to prove your worthiness through trial?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. Elder Korath had warned him this might happen. Ancient Etherian law allowed for trials of worthiness when marriages were disputed. What kind of trial? Jake asked. The traditional 3 trials, the Chief Justice said. Combat, wisdom, and sacrifice. You will face each test and be judged on your performance. Success in all 3 will prove your worthiness. Failure in any will annul your marriage. Jake looked at his wives. Lyra gave him a small nod of encouragement. Nova pressed her hand to her heart. Zara mouthed the words, "You can do this." "I accept," Jake said. The first trial was combat, scheduled for the next morning in the council's arena. Jake spent the evening preparing with Lyra, who had insisted on helping him train despite the late hour. Kaeldor will choose his best warrior. As champion, she explained as they practiced sword forms in the estate's training room. Probably Captain Theron. He's fast and skilled, but overconfident. Any advice? Jake asked, adjusting his grip on the practice sword. Don't try to fight like an Etherian, Lyra said. Use your human training. We fight with elegance and tradition. You fight to win. The next morning, Jake stood in the arena facing Captain Theron. The Etherian warrior was everything Lyra had said. Tall, graceful, and supremely confident. He carried his sword like it was part of his body and moved with the fluid precision of decades of training. The crowd of spectators was larger than Jake had expected. Word of the trials had spread through the capital, and people were curious to see how a human would fare against Etherian tradition. "Begin," called the referee. Theron came at Jake with a series of perfect textbook attacks, each one flowing smoothly into the next. Jake gave ground, blocking and dodging while he studied his opponent's patterns. The Etherian fought beautifully, but predictably, following forms that had been practiced for generations. When Theron lunged forward with a particularly elegant thrust, Jake did something no Etherian warrior would expect. He dropped to one knee, swept Theron's legs, and caught him off balance. While the Etherian struggled to recover, Jake pressed his advantage with a series of brutal, efficient attacks that had nothing to do with elegance and everything to do with winning. Theron went down hard with Jake's sword at his throat. The arena was silent for a moment before erupting in shocked applause. "First trial complete," the Chief Justice announced. "The human has proven his warrior's spirit." The second trial was wisdom, held that afternoon in the council chamber. Jake was presented with an ancient riddle that had stumped scholars for centuries. "A king has 3 daughters," the Chief Justice read from an old scroll. "Each claims to love him most. The first says she loves him more than gold. The second says she loves him more than jewels. The third says she loves him like salt. Which daughter truly loves the king?" Jake thought about the riddle while the council watched. This was clearly a test of understanding Etherian values and thinking. He could see Kaeldor smirking, certain that a simple human soldier couldn't solve something that had challenged great minds. But Jake wasn't trying to think like an Etherian scholar. He was thinking like someone who had grown up poor and understood the value of simple things. "The third daughter," he said. "The one who said she loved him like salt." "Explain your reasoning," the Chief Justice said. "Gold and jewels are precious but not necessary," Jake replied. "You can live without them. But salt preserves food and keeps people alive. It's common and cheap, but absolutely essential. The daughter who compared her love to salt was saying her love was something her father couldn't live without." The council. Members looked impressed despite themselves. Even Kaeldor's smirk had faded. "Second trial complete," the Chief Justice announced. "The human has shown wisdom." The final trial was sacrifice, held that evening in a private chamber. Jake was brought before the council and told to choose between 2 options. "You may keep your marriage to the Silverleaf sisters, but must renounce your human citizenship and become fully Etherian," the Chief Justice explained. "Or you may return to Earth with full honors, but the marriage will be annulled." Jake didn't hesitate. "I choose to stay and become Etherian." "Even though it means giving up your homeland forever?" Kaeldor demanded. "Even though you'll never see Earth again?" "My home is where my family is," Jake said simply. "My wives are my family now. Everything else is just geography." The Chief Justice nodded slowly. "Third trial complete. The human has proven his dedication through sacrifice." She stood and addressed the full council. Jake Morrison has passed all 3 trials. His marriage to the Silverleaf sisters is confirmed as valid and binding under our ancient laws. The crowd erupted in applause, but Kaeldor wasn't finished. He stood and called out in a voice that carried over the noise. I invoke the right of blood challenge. As a member of the Silverleaf bloodline, I claim the right to personal combat for control of the family. The arena fell silent. This was an even older law than the trials, one that hadn't been used in generations. Jake looked at his wives and saw fear in their eyes for the first time. This wasn't just about proving worthiness anymore. This was about survival. Challenge accepted, Jake said, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. Tomorrow he would face Kaeldor himself in single combat. The winner would take everything. The loser would lose not just the fight, but his life. Jake had thought the trials were the hard part. Now he realized they had just been practice for the real test. Jake woke before dawn on the day of the blood challenge. He found all 3 of his wives waiting for him in the kitchen, their faces pale with worry. None of them had slept much either. You don't have to do this, Nova said quietly. There might be another way. There is no other way, Jake replied, accepting the cup of coffee Zara handed him. Kaeldor won't stop until he gets what he wants. This ends today, one way or another. Lyra sat across from him at the table. He's been training for this his whole life. He's faster than Theron and much more dangerous. But he's never fought. Someone who learned to kill on 20 different worlds, Jake said. He's a duelist. I'm a soldier. There's a difference. The sisters helped him prepare in silence. They dressed his hair in the traditional style for formal combat and painted symbols on his arms that marked him as a member of their family. Each symbol felt like a blessing and a promise. Whatever happens, Jake told them as they walked to the arena, I want you to know that these last few months have been the best of my life. I never expected to find a family like this. You're not going to die today, Zara said firmly. We won't let you. The arena was packed with spectators. Word of the blood challenge had spread throughout the capital and beyond. This was the kind of dramatic event that people would talk about for years. A human fighting an Etherian lord for the right to marry into one of the oldest families on the planet. Kaeldor was already waiting in the center of the arena. He wore traditional combat armor that gleamed like silver and carried a sword that had been in his family for generations. He looked every inch the noble warrior that he was. Jake wore simpler armor and carried a standard military blade. He looked like what he was, a common soldier who had stumbled into something much bigger than himself. The Chief Justice read the formal challenge and the rules of combat. This would be a fight to the death with no quarter asked or given. The winner would take control of the Silverleaf family and all their assets. The loser would be buried with honor, but would be forgotten by history. Are both warriors prepared? The Chief Justice called out. I am ready, Kaeldor replied, his voice carrying confidence and barely controlled rage. Ready, Jake said simply, then let the challenge begin. Kaeldor came at Jake like a storm. His sword moved in patterns too fast to follow, each strike flowing into the next with deadly precision. Jake gave ground quickly, blocking desperately while he tried to find an opening. The crowd gasped as Kaeldor's blade sliced through Jake's armor and drew first blood. A red line appeared on Jake's shoulder, but he kept fighting. He had been hurt worse and survived. Is this the best humanity can offer? Kaeldor taunted as he pressed his attack. A clumsy soldier who cannot even hold a sword properly? Jake didn't respond. He was too busy trying to stay alive. Kaeldor was everything Lyra had warned him about and more. The Etherian Lord was faster, stronger, and more skilled than any opponent Jake had ever faced. But Jake had learned something important during his years of war. Skill was only part of fighting. The other part was understanding what you were fighting for. As Kaeldor landed another hit, Jake caught sight of his wives in the crowd. Lyra was watching with the trained eye of a tactical analyst. Nova had her hands pressed to her mouth in fear, and Zara was gripping the rail so hard her knuckles were white. They were depending on him, not just for their safety, but for their freedom to choose their own lives. If he failed here, they would spend the rest of their days as prisoners in golden cages, married to men who saw them as possessions rather than people. That thought gave Jake strength he didn't know he had. He stopped retreating and started fighting back. His attacks were rougher than Kaldor's, less elegant, but more determined. He used every dirty trick he had learned in back-alley fights and desperate battles. This wasn't about honor or tradition. This was about protecting his family. Kaldor seemed surprised by the change in Jake's fighting style. The human was no longer trying to match Etherian's sword work. Instead, he was fighting like someone who had nothing left to lose. Jake caught Kaldor's sword on his blade and stepped inside the Etherian's guard. Before Kaldor could react, Jake's elbow connected with his jaw and sent him staggering backward. "Impossible!" Kaldor snarled, spitting blood. "You fight without honor!" "I fight to win," Jake replied. "There's a difference." The battle turned brutal after that. Both men were bleeding from multiple wounds and fighting through pain and exhaustion. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the elegant duel became a raw struggle for survival. In the end, it came down to one moment. Kaldor lunged forward with a perfect killing thrust, the kind of attack that had never failed him before. But Jake had been waiting for it. He sidestepped at the last second and brought his sword up in a move he had learned from a grizzled sergeant on a planet whose name he couldn't even pronounce. Kaldor's eyes went wide with surprise and pain. He looked down at the blade protruding from his chest, then back at Jake with something like respect. "Well fought," he whispered, and collapsed. The arena was silent for a long moment. Then the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Jake dropped his sword and fell to his knees, exhausted and bleeding but alive. His wives rushed into the arena and surrounded him. Lyra checked his wounds with professional efficiency, while Nova and Zara held him steady. Their touch felt like coming home after a long journey. "Is it over?" Jake asked. "It's over," Lyra confirmed. "You won. We're safe." The Chief Justice approached and formally declared Jake the victor. With Kaldor's death, all challenges to the marriage were ended. The Silverleaf family was secure under Jake's protection. The recovery took several weeks. Jake's wounds were serious but not life-threatening, thanks to Nova's medical skills and Etherian healing technology. During those long days in bed, his wives took turns caring for him, and they talked about their future together. "What happens now?" Jake asked one afternoon as he sat in the garden with Zara. His shoulder was still bandaged, but he could move around without too much pain. "Now we build the life we want," Zara replied. "All of us together." "And what kind of life is that?" Zara smiled. "We've been talking about that. We want to start a foundation that helps war orphans from both our peoples, use our wealth to build schools and hospitals in the border regions. Nova wants to train human medics in Etherian healing techniques," Lyra added, joining them on the garden bench. "And I want to work with your military leaders to improve cooperation between our forces." "What about you?" Jake asked. "What do you want?" Lyra was quiet for a moment. "I want what we have right now, a family that chose each other instead of being forced together by circumstances." Nova arrived with tea and fresh bread from the kitchen. "The foundation papers are ready for your signature," she told Jake. "We're calling it the Vex High Memorial Foundation. We thought he would approve." Jake signed the documents and officially became a partner in his wife's charitable work. It felt good to have a purpose beyond just fighting wars. He had spent so many years destroying things that it was refreshing to help build something positive. The Foundation's first project was a medical clinic in the refugee camps near the war zone. Jake and his wives traveled there together to oversee the construction. It was strange being back in a combat area, but this time he was there to heal instead of harm. "The children love you," Nova observed as she watched Jake teaching a group of young Etherians how to play a human card game. "You're good with them." "Kids are kids, no matter what planet they're from," Jake replied. "They just want someone to pay attention to them." That evening, as they sat around a campfire sharing stories with the refugees, Jake realized how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a lonely soldier with no family and no future beyond the next battle. Now he was surrounded by people who depended on him and whom he loved in return. "Penny for your thoughts," Lyra said, settling beside him by the fire. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Jake replied. "A year ago, I never would have imagined any of this." "Do you regret it?" Nova asked. "Giving up your old life?" Jake looked at his 3 wives sitting around the fire, their faces lit by the dancing flames. Lyra with her warrior's strength and tactical mind, Nova with her healing hands and gentle heart, Zara with her brilliant intellect and quiet wisdom. Each of them had become precious to him in different ways. "Not for a second," he said honestly. "This is the life I was meant to have. I just didn't know it until I found all of you." 5 years later, Jake stood on the balcony of their home watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. The war with the Skarn had finally ended with a peace treaty that both sides could live with. The Foundation had built schools and clinics on a dozen worlds. His marriages had inspired other cross-species couples to follow their example. "The Council wants to make you an official ambassador," Zara said, joining him on the balcony. "Full diplomatic status with both governments." "What do you think?" Jake asked. "I think you've always been a bridge between our peoples," she replied. "Now they want to make it official." Lyra and Nova emerged from the house carrying their newest project, adoption papers for 3 war orphans who needed a family. The children were already living with them on a trial basis and had quickly become part of the household.